The year is 2021. It's the beginning of the winter anime season, and we've just been through a pretty weird, somewhat questionable, and a very stale year for anime.
I also genuinely think that anime as a whole just wasn't very exciting this year.
Which of course meant that people's expectations going into the new year were relatively high. And those expectations were not only met, they were in fact exceeded. You've got Mushoku Tensei, Horimiya, Doctor Stone, Slimy Sekai, ReZero, all incredibly popular titles, including Attack on Titan, the final season airing at the same time. This might just have been single-handedly the best anime season of all time up until that point. And don't just take my word for it, here's the famous British YouTuber from that one Japan-based podcast saying the exact same thing.
This is a contender for one of the strongest seasons in the history of anime.
Couldn't agree more, gentlemen. The season truly was one of the greatest ever. A banger, if you will. Stop. What's that? In a season as jam-packed as this, you're telling me there is another anime original series that everyone from Twitter to big-time anitubers are hyping up? In that case, let us go check out that anime ourselves and see what it's all about. Okay, hold on a second. So let me get this straight. There's a cute anime girl who can talk to dead cicadas.
What are you doing in a place like this?
And then there's also this egg that she cannot break for some reason. It also seems like she might be a bit of a shut-in character. Then when she steps out of her house at night, she gets teleported to her school only to find a couple of faceless bullies writing creepy things on someone's locker. I don't know guys, this show doesn't really seem all that interesting to me. There is just too much going on for my tiny brain to process. Oh my god, it's a talking toilet paper. You know what? I take that back. This is the best thing I've ever seen. And that's roughly how the hype for One Direct Priority began. One Direct Priority might just have been the most hyped up anime original series ever on its release. Not only was One Direct an incredible work of art and animation to marvel at, it also had a very twisted story that managed to grab people's attention and garner praise like no other anime from that season. Which really makes you wonder, what exactly caused this anime to turn into one of the biggest shitstorm of that year? How did the discussion go from this is one of the greatest anime ever to this is the biggest disappointment I've ever experienced? How is it that even after 2 entire years and dozens upon dozens of videos with hundreds of thousands of views, there is seemingly not a single instance where anyone has mentioned the actual reason behind One Direct's downfall? Everyone likes to think that it's Cloverworks' fault that the anime turned out as bad as it did, but the truth might be a lot more complicated than it seems. Our journey begins with the creator of One Direct Priority. Shinji Nojima is a screenwriter who has over 30 years of experience writing for TV shows. After working for such a long duration in the industry, Shinji decided that it was finally time for him to work on the script for an anime. To help bring Shinji's ideas to fruition, he needed a studio willing to animate his story for him. He asked a producer working at Nippon TV for any recommendations, who contacted Aniplex for a studio willing to animate a story, who asked Cloverworks to step up to the challenge. The studio was already busy enough working on 2 different anime at that moment. So of course the only logical decision would be to take on this third project themselves and put forth a talented team of individuals led by the debutant director Shin Wakabayashi to the work. Surely this won't cause any unforeseen problems in the future. Fast forward to January 2021 and One Direct Priority has successfully managed to gain an impressive amount of attention right from the release of its first episode. Everyone seems to be loving the anime. The reviews are overwhelmingly positive and some people are already calling it a potential candidate for anime of the year. I mean, I guess the talking toilet paper is pretty cool and all, but what was the anime even about? One Direct Priority is a show that's neither easy to understand nor to describe. The story of One Direct follows a shut-in girl who has an odd pair of eyes named Oto Eye. The entire stuff earlier about the weird egg and the talking toilet paper was all part of her dream world. In that space, Ai finds herself fighting against a horde of erratically moving monsters, whose sole purpose is to hurt the other girl who hatches out of the mysterious egg. The voice that comes out of both the cicada and the toilet paper belong to these pair of mannequins named Aka and Uraka. Everything about this opening sequence seems so sudden and out of place, creating this dreadful feeling that something is definitely wrong here. This uneasy feeling is soon answered with a glimpse to the tragic backstory of Ai, and mainly of her friend Koito, who is no longer alive. Ai was bullied into becoming a loner because of her heterochromia. It's later revealed that her one and only friend Koito had jumped off of the school building committing suicide, after which Ai had stopped going to school entirely. This worries both her mother and her teacher severely, who constantly checks up on Ai in hopes that she can go back to school and readjust into society, but their efforts remain meaningless. Back in the dream world, the girls that appear out of the eggs are actually dead in real life. The big bad monster that suddenly appears in that dream world is the physical manifestation of the egg girl's trauma. With each egg girl that Ai manages to save from those terrifying monsters, her friend Koito's lifeless statue that hangs off the school's rooftop in her dreams becomes warmer and warmer, meaning eventually Ai can be reunited with her friend once she manages to save enough of those egg girls. To sum it all up, the story itself works pretty much in a Monster of the Week format where with each new episode, there is a different egg girl that Ai and the gang has to protect against the scary monsters to revive their loved ones. But what made Wonder Egg stand out despite being a somewhat formulaic show is the fact that it was so fucking dark. For example, look no further than our other main characters. Just like Ai, every other main character we meet also has someone they wish to bring back from the dead. Nehru is introduced at the end of the first episode, and she exudes this typical don't talk to me lowly human kind of aura. In the case of Nehru, the person she wants to save is her dead sister, who had stabbed Nehru viciously from behind before jumping off of a bridge herself. Then in episode 3, we meet up with Rika, who is an annoying tsundere extrovert greedy idol girl with severe daddy issues. The kind of daddy issues where she doesn't even know who her dad is. She also indulges herself in a fair bit of self-harm to avoid thinking about the painful things in life. And lastly, we are introduced to Momoe and her biggest issue, her greatest trauma, the very thing that drives her forward every day to fight these insane looking monsters is the fact that she doesn't look feminine enough. If you think I'm grossly understating her various flaws and features as a character, then don't worry, the anime doesn't care about her either. All these characters hold some form of deep-rooted trauma behind their cute out front. And the same can be said about every other character in the anime. The Akas might guide the main characters through this weird world of monsters, but they clearly hold some alternative motives behind their dumb outfits. But even more so than these silly looking mannequins, Ai's teacher, Sawaki sensei, sounds like a genuinely nice guy, but the visuals frame him as this creepy individual who might even be responsible for Koito's death. The anime consciously made the decision of giving up any subtlety in favor of a more outspoken and dramatic plotline, which seemed to work surprisingly well for the anime. But the thing is, when using topics as sensitive as suicide, molestation, self-harm, physical abuse, among many other terrible real-life ordeals in your story, you need to be especially careful not to mess up at any point, or the whole thing will eventually crumble down into nothing. Wonder Egg Priority, however, had no such worries for the time being. I mean, sure, the show was definitely a little edgy at times.
This is none of your business! I don't speak bitch!
But despite that, the anime seemed to make a genuine effort at respectfully tackling these horrifying topics. For example, Ai, being a victim of bullying herself, empathizes with the other girls who went through similar situations as her that led them to take their own lives. Not only does she encourage them to overcome their past traumas, she even spends some quality time with all the girls after defeating the big bad monster of the episode. This aspect of the show really clicked with the audience, and things were pretty smooth sailing for Wonder Egg. Aside from a minor hiccup in episode 4 of the anime where a somewhat sexist remark by the creator on the topic of suicide made people kind of angry online. The director had to personally step in to clarify the situation, and the crisis was quickly evaded. Although after that episode, one certain individual whom I'm gonna call Foreshadowkun 420 went on to write a review about the anime comparing Wonder Egg Priority to Darling in the Franxx. Oh boy, and an uncomfortable amount of people seemed to agree, but the Wonder Egg fans were not concerned in the slightest. In fact, they pressed on forward with even more excitement. Their ever-growing hype would continue to be rewarded with even more incredible looking fight sequences and some cute little Pokemon pets. The visuals of the anime have a charm to them much like any Kyoto animation show, which becomes especially apparent through the much quieter scenes of the anime. While the quick, colorful, action-packed battles feel fresh and unique almost every single time given how many directors worked on the show altogether. Those incredible looking fight sequences were also the central reason that many people got hooked on the anime in the first place. By the way, you can thank the key animator Yukiko Horiguchi for the Kyoto animation feel of the anime, who has worked on practically every KyoAni show since 2005. But honestly, props to all the people who worked on this anime. They nailed every part of the production, from the aesthetically pleasing yet at times terrifying feel of the visuals to the outstanding soundtrack that elevates the already impactful moments of the show. Fun fact, the guy who made the soundtrack for Wonder Egg has never done anything else in the anime industry, which might be the reason his tracks feel like the perfect choice for this project that already has a TV show writer with no prior anime experience. So anyway, my personal favorite scene from Wonder Egg is this animation of a squishy thigh. It is so unnecessary, but it's also a proof of how the staff refuses to cut corners even for things that most people wouldn't notice. Okay, who am I kidding? Everyone noticed that scene. A better example would be how in any normal anime, the background and the characters are usually kept on different layers to make the scene look more natural and realistic whenever the camera moves closer. But in Wonder Egg Priority, the camera zooms into the scene in a very rigid manner that makes the scene feel so much more uneasy and uncanny. Cloverworks really went out of their way to deliver a perfect package of beautifully crafted episodes every single week without fail. I mean, how the hell were they even able to keep up the quality of the anime since episode 1? Well, of course the answer is by overworking themselves to death, but let's ignore that for now and move on to the episode 8 of the series.
Hello. Welcome. Do you want a Wonder Egg?
It's hard.
Wait. Why is it a recap episode? The downfall of Wonder Egg started with the announcement of a recap episode, which isn't an uncommon thing for anime to have occasionally, but in this case, it was kind of concerning. Usually when recap episodes are aired, they are specifically called 0.5 episodes, but Wonder Egg aired their recap episode as the official episode 8 of the series, which means that now we're not actually getting 12 episodes of content, but only 11. Okay, whatever. At least we still have the possibility of a 13th episode, so it's not a big deal. But remember how people were praising the anime for having a well thought out and deep story covering some really dark topics? Well, all of that is kind of falling apart now that the story is nearing its end. For some reason, the anime decided to replace the Monster of the Week format and in turn, really downplay the role of these egg girls that were once so crucial to the story. Granted, the anime was never about that subtlety, but now, it was really starting to get on people's nose. To give you an example, let's have a look at the design of the monsters themselves. While I do agree that the monsters were pretty terrifying to look at in the beginning, as the series progressed, they started looking less and less humanoid and became more of the same unimpressionable, almost cartoonish representations of the egg girls' trauma, if you can even call them that. The egg girls themselves had now become part of the background, whose sole purpose in the story was to feed into the constant suffering of our main characters. What was once a somewhat edgy yet respectful show about suicide had now been turned into an unapologetically edgy show, where the characters are thrown into these absolutely bizarre situations with no real conclusion to draw from their terrifying experience. This point can best be summarized by how the anime decided to handle the story of the trans boy in episode 10. Episode 10 of Wonder Egg mostly followed the story of Momoe and Kaoru, a trans boy that Momoe has to save from his trauma. The scene that followed soon after covering Kaoru's backstory was pretty gross and disgusting in its details, which would imply that Momo is going to help him out by working with Kaoru to defeat the manifestation of his trauma. But instead, Momoe uses this opportunity to focus on herself and proceeds to defeat that terrible monster for her own sake, thus overcoming her own past trauma. The episode then ends with Momoe finally meeting up with her friend Haruka, who she was fighting for this whole time, before being forced to eat her own Pokemon pet in a very dark and frankly absurd scene that overshadowed everything that happened prior and left Momoe with a new unlocked trauma. Genuinely speaking, what was the point of making Kaoru's backstory so unnecessarily detailed and fucked up if he was just going to get sidelined for Momoe to have her big moment of realization, and then even have that big moment prove meaningless by the end of that same episode, as Momoe now has a brand new trauma she now needs to suffer through. This episode was extremely disturbing and distasteful for the sake of that shock factor alone. Not really saying anything meaningful about some extremely sensitive topics, but instead using them as a gimmick to further the plot. And as if that wasn't enough, around that same time, rumors about the writer being a sexist and a lesbophobe started to spread around in the community, which only added fuel to the fire. But all these rumors were quickly debunked, and all these nitpicks about the plot were only noted by a small number of people. The majority was still on board with seeing the anime through to its end. Unfortunately for them, things were about to go from bad to worse, with the release of the episode 11 of Wonder Egg Priority. The episode mostly focused on the backstory of a character we had only first heard the name of in the last episode. Frill was an AI robot constructed by the Akas back when they still had functioning bodies. Both Haka and Uraka treated Frill like she was their own daughter, and they gave her similar traits to that of a 14-year-old girl. One of those traits was the emotion of jealousy. Everything was as fine as can be in the beginning. All three of them were slowly and steadily starting to function like an actual family. But things don't stay the same forever. With time, Aka moved on in life to start an actual family with Asuza, someone he loved dearly, someone he cared for a lot, and someone that Frill was jealous of. Before their eyes, Frill was starting to change ever so slightly herself. A very evident change of hers was this constant lip smacking. Uraraka was the only one who took note of her strange behavior, but he kept brushing it off to the side until it was too late.
I don't think I can.
In her jealousy, Frill took Asuza's life. Aka, blinded by his rage, locked up Frill in a closed cabinet with no way for her to get out. His devastated life, now filled with sorrow, regret and dullness, found a new light of hope in the form of his daughter Himari. The years soon went by and slowly the two of them forgot about that terrible day and Frill altogether. But then on Himari's 14th birthday, this happened.
I'm not a kid, I'm in junior high.
That night, Himari died. It looked like...
This time, Uraraka, blinded with pure rage, stormed into that same basement only to find cables running through the closed cabinet that Frill was locked into for over a decade. She was the one behind Himari's death. Uraraka, in his fit of rage, ended up destroying Frill for good this time. Except, she didn't simply go away. The Akas soon noticed the increase in suicide among 14-year-old girls, and they connected the dots back to Frill. They devised the One Direct project in an attempt to overturn her wrongdoings, meaning that this character we knew nothing of till now was the main culprit of every tragedy we've seen thus far. This was by far the darkest, the most brutal, and canonically the most important episode of One Direct Priority. It was also the episode that divided the community more than anything else that came before it. Who would have guessed? Changing the theme of your entire show from people can end themselves for various reasons which should be discussed and understood to an AI that makes funny pop sounds did it was not a good idea in the slightest. But wait a minute, if Frill is meant to be the big bad character of the series, then what about the obvious creepy villainous teacher of 5 who draws middle school girls all alone in a closed space with no one else around? Don't worry, episode 12 addresses that same issue by revealing that Sawaki-sensei had nothing to do with Koito's death, and as a matter of fact, it was actually Ai just being insecure about her first love, that is, handsome boy Sawaki-sensei. So let me get this straight. This entire time, One Direct continuously portrayed Ai's teacher as the biggest suspect behind her friend's death. And now it flipped that narrative on its head, revealing that he was just an all-around great guy, since apparently, this AI robot we've only seen in the previous episode was the true villain all along. Not to mention, parallel worlds somehow tie into all of this. In case you've forgotten, One Direct had started off as kind of a deep and touching tale about the lives of some depressed teenagers, where the utter lack of context was the driving force of its praise. And now that same story had become a scientific mumbo-jumbo about some parallel worlds and AI robots who are apparently responsible for all suicide in young girls. And to add insult to injury, the last episode of One Direct would not be airing for over 3 months straight because of that unintended recap episode. So for the time being, all that people had to go off of is this uncompleted, flawed story that made little to no sense given the context. Now it really was looking like Cloverworks had just pulled a darling in the Franxx on its audience. If only we had listened to the early warnings of Foreshadowcon 420, then maybe the damage would have been a little more under control. Because oh boy were the people confused and angry as fuck. The biggest issue that everyone had with this lackluster ending and the upcoming finale was the sheer amount of loose plot points that the last episode still needed to take care of. For example, we still need an actual resolution for Momoe's traumatizing experience in episode 10, same with Rika's never-ending search for a dad, her self-harm tendencies that only got half resolved, her future career as an idol, and her pan-passing experience in her dream realm. Wait, is Neru even a part of the story anymore? What are the rules of the parallel world? Are these Aka boys really evil? How did those cables get in Frill's closed cabin? What exactly does Frill want to begin with? Also, the entire thing about Sawaki-sensei being an absolute creep for no real reason, and most importantly, what the fuck is the deal with the talking toilet paper? I mean, I know it's a gimmick meant for the Akas to communicate with our main characters, but I swear it's not even like a reoccurring theme. Much like everything else in the story so far, it's just there for the sake of it. The chances of that last episode somehow turning everything around and concluding this utterly messed up story in a decently satisfying way were extremely low at best, especially in a mere 24 minutes of runtime. Wait, no, hold on a second, there seems to be a new announcement. Gentlemen, looks like we're getting an hour-long special episode that will finally conclude the series. Sure, there are only like a sixth of us left by now who still give a shit about One Direct, but there is only one more destination left to go. No, wait, what the fuck? Why is half the episode a fucking recap? Oh, for fuck's sake, at least let the second half be the conclusion we deserve, damn it.
The sequel was supposed to connect loose plot threads and answer questions, ending up causing a stir within the fandom and add nothing valuable, just more confusion. It's sad.
That's all.
So wait, so you literally just added this element, like 20 minutes before the ending, and then that's it.
Fuck 1 to 8 priority, I'm out of here.
And just like that, the anime ended. There was no resolution, there was no explanation, and there was absolutely no conclusion to be found. In fact, the anime added like 4 new elements to the story, broke apart the friendship between our 4 main characters, gave us this incredible running animation of I, and just said fuck you to its audience. The only thing that was left behind was an indescribable sour taste, similar to that of a rotten egg. Which is to say, if the audience wasn't already angry before, now they were definitely out for blood. Tweets after tweets, comments after comments, videos upon videos were made criticizing the terrible ending of One Direct Priority. Some people were still hoping for a second season to justify the open ending, but there was bad news. Reportedly, the disc sales of One Direct couldn't even get past 1,000 copies, meaning any chances for a second season were highly unlikely. So this special episode was really gonna be the end of this anime. No matter how much the angry and hopeful crowd screamed in agony, the anime had ended, and there was nothing they could do about it. So, what actually happened? Who do we have to blame for this abomination of an ending? Most of the articles and videos online will tell you that the production issues were the main cause for the unsatisfying ending of the anime.
It's pretty clear that the disappointing nature of this finale is the result of production issues.
But in reality, the production issues had nothing to do with that ending. How do I know this? Well, as it turns out, the truth has always been right there, hidden in plain sight in the form of an interview with the creator of One Direct that came out just a few days after that disaster of an ending took place. It's just that by the time this interview came out, most people had collectively moved on from anything related to One Direct, and the ones who still stuck around only wanted to share their terrible experience with the anime. With that said, here's the truth behind One Direct Priority. The reason for the unsatisfying ending of One Direct Priority can be boiled down to 2 major reasons, both of which are caused by the writer and not the director himself. The first of them being his approach to writing. Shinji's approach to writing when it comes to TV shows was oriented towards TRP ratings, which meant he never really focused on the overarching plot of the story, but rather on the individual episodes in an attempt to consistently stay relevant and not lose its viewers. An approach that he kept using even while writing for One Direct Priority.
This is the same for live-action dramas, but I decided on a rough landing for each episode. It's the same for live-action dramas, but I have a rough idea of where each episode will take place, and then I think about it as I write. That's
basically the reason behind the episodic Monster of the Week format of the show. But here's the thing about this form of writing that relies on creating hype over a well-written story. With TV shows, you almost always need to create a sensational product in order to get those TRP ratings up, which is how they make their money back. Thus, they can essentially afford having a bad ending to their series as long as they remain popular enough till the end. Unlike mainstream television, however, anime makes the majority of its money through disc sales, and for people to buy those discs, the anime needs to leave enough of an impact to encourage its viewers to support said show. So while the anime did in fact receive a lot of attention initially because of the writer's sensational writing style, it only really caused more harm than good in the long run.
Mr. Sawaki?
Which leads us to the second and possibly the biggest problem with One Direct Priority, which I will let Shinji describe in his own words.
Were there many discussions about the content of the script? The idea that you would even imply that the director and writer weren't in constant contact is absurd.
Yeah. So, were there many discussions about the content of the scripts? No, I didn't. I just kept writing and sending the scripts. I knew that the best way to make a good show was to give it to the director and his team and let them make it as they wanted. It's...
You didn't have a back and forth.
Let's just take a moment to appreciate the logic here. We've already established the writer has never created, let alone worked on an anime before. Not to mention, he himself doesn't know where the story is going to go exactly since he's working on the anime episode by episode. In such extreme conditions, instead of keeping someone experienced in terms of anime production who might help Shinji alongside him, he just went ahead and reinvented the entire production process of an anime original series on his very first attempt. If anything, I'm surprised the quality of the show turned out to be as incredible as it was, given how the director had no input whatsoever from the creator of an anime original series. This also means that the writer had no involvement with the one thing about the anime that people consistently enjoyed. That is, everything aside from the story. Simply amazing. I'm starting to think the anime was doomed to fail the moment it got greenlit. Given all this context, it's easy to understand how the entire plot about Frill just came out of left field. Instead of vaguely thinking about the overarching plot and various character arcs of the story that would eventually seamlessly transition into the final act, the writer was more focused on creating as many jaw-dropping moments as he possibly could. Thus, the scope of the series kept getting bigger and bigger until eventually, there was no possible way for Shinji to wrap up the story in the time he was given. Essentially speaking, Shinji's writing style and his 30+ years of experience with TV shows were simply not suited for the medium of anime, but there was no one to tell him otherwise. Anime Slushy has made an excellent breakdown of this entire cesspit of an interview that I will link down below. But all of this is not to say that Cloverworks wasn't somewhat responsible for the outrage. While they might not have directly contributed to the writing side of things, they did however put a lot of pressure on their staff due to tight deadlines. Cloverworks was already working on 2 separate anime titles when they were approached by Shinji, so instead of sending their A-team for the project, they sent in a much smaller but equally passionate and talented team of people led by director Shin Wakabayashi. This team then went on to exceed everyone's expectations with that incredible first episode and set a standard of production value for themselves that they would not let go of throughout the runtime of the anime. But their passion towards One Direct Priority soon turned into a double-edged sword as they lacked the proper time and resources to fulfill their visions. Thus, as they continued to work on One Direct Priority while it was still being released, the small team, even when taking additional outside help at times, could not combat the time constraints, and soon as the deadline caught up to them, they had no choice but to delay an episode. The passion of the staff members could only take the project so far under those incredibly tight deadlines, and by episode 10, they even had to call in help from overseas. A couple of those foreign artists gave out an interview describing the dire situations over on Cloverworks that by now were becoming hard to ignore for the fans, resulting in further outrage towards the anime. Soon after the first 12 episodes finished airing, an article on One Direct came out where allegedly one of the producers was so overworked that he had to be hospitalized a few times. The discussions surrounding the terrible work conditions of studios and unfavorable treatment of their staff members is more prevalent today than ever before, with a handful of Jujutsu Kaisen staff coming out about their awful experiences working for MAPPA. It shouldn't go without saying that no artist should be placed in such a compromising situation where time and money are prioritized over the health and freedom of said artist. Looking back on the One Direct Priority situation, it's quite possible that the strange approach Shinji took towards making the story resulted in additional pressure on the staff members, which may or may not be the reason he had a bad experience with one of the producers. I don't want to straight up accuse Shinji of any wrongdoings, but all of this did make me wonder just how credible Shinji really was. You see, I sort of just brushed off the entire sexist thing from episode 4 at first, because many claimed that it was an out of context clip that the director later clarified. This was the clip in question.
Boys and girls' suicides typically mean different things. Men are more goal-oriented, while women are emotion-oriented.
Women tend to be impulsive and are more easily influenced by others' voices and opinions.
And yeah, out of context, that does sound like an extremely sexist thing to say. Boys have goal-oriented suicide while girls are driven by emotions. That's a dumb notion to have, especially when the entire theme of your story is about suicide. So anyway, here's an earlier interview which Shinji released around the February of 2021, where he outright says the exact same sexist opinion. In the case of men, I think there are logical reasons why they commit suicide, such as because they are really suffering from bullying or because they are in debt. But when it comes to girls, it might be strange to call it a feeling, but this is a story that I started writing with a vague idea that maybe that kind of thing would work. Call me presumptuous, but I believe that the writer is extremely delusional. He thinks he understands the younger generation while also writing stories where a young person gets abused and tortured just for the sake of it.
High school teacher, 1993. A high school teacher and his female student fall in love. Student also gets a rape blackmail plot. Seija no Koshin, 1998. A group of mentally disabled teens get sent to work and live in a factory where they get abused physically and sexually. Koino no Waltz, 2004. Blind piano girl only has a talent and a pet dog to rely on. Yes, she is abused.
After hearing the description of his previous shows that contain a lot of abusive storylines, and reading everything he had to say in regards to One Reg in the medium of anime, I cannot help but get the impression that he doesn't actually care about the art of storytelling as much as he cares about TRP ratings. For example, in that same interview from February, Shinji points towards the works of Makoto Shinkai as an example of how realistic story using fantasy elements can be written without focusing on the specifics of the magical system in place. Firstly, I don't think Shinji deserves to compare his stories with that of Makoto Shinkai for obvious reasons. I mean, say whatever you will about Shinkai movies, but at least he works alongside his team as the writer and director, instead of abandoning them before the project even begins. And second of all, it's absurd how he didn't take his own advice and instead proceeded to make a terrible attempt at explaining away the borderline magical themes of the story, for which there was no need, unless he never really cared for the themes of his own story as much as he did for the presentation and the shock value at the end of each episode.
That's my underlying point. He's a hack.
Yeah.
Like, I am comfortable saying that he's a fucking hack.
Yeah. I think that's the more likely.
I did not make this video to flame or target the writer specifically, but after looking at everything he has done and said so far, I find it a bit disheartening and quite frankly, extremely annoying that the terrible ending of the anime gets credited to the production issues and the inexperienced yet passionate staff members, as if they were in complete control of the story.
I really feel for Shinji Nojima on this.
The problem with these videos and articles is that they are based on incomplete information. After all my digging and searching, I could only find 2 videos that cite this interview by Shinji Nojima as their source of information. But these videos barely have a couple thousand views each. So for as far as these hundreds of thousands of people are concerned, the disaster of One Reg Priority comes down to the inexperienced staff members, while the writer is entirely blameless, if not someone we should feel sympathy for, where in reality, it was the delusional creator of One Reg Priority who did everything according to his own wishes and in the end remains as the very reason for its inevitable destruction. There has never been an anime that had the same level of both popularity and critical success quite like One Reg Priority, that would also go on to become one of the biggest disasters in anime's history. I'm not here to argue if this is subjectively the worst ending ever made, but factually, the ratings speak for themselves. Again, I highly recommend checking out the series on One Reg made by Anime Slushy. They've made a 6-hour-long breakdown of the entire anime that I watched and enjoyed thoroughly. Although I wasn't so excited to hear them talk shit about one of my favorite anime ever throughout the series.
It's kind of like in that a silent voice way.
Oh God, how did I not compare this to a silent voice?
Oh, the next one has super big silent voice vibes.
Fucking silent voice.
Yeah.
Oh come on guys, you're hurting my feelings here. So anyway, One Reg fans, your anime shot is terrible. In all seriousness, if you personally enjoyed One Reg despite all the flaws and the gaping holes in the story, then that's absolutely fine. I also had a lot of fun with the anime for the most part. And for the majority who dislikes the anime, I hope you learned something new about your favorite abomination of a show. Today, One Reg Priority stands as a cautionary tale of what not to do when making an anime. So if you really think about it, it wasn't all so terrible in hindsight. The writer has gone back to making TV shows for good this time. Shin Wakabayashi continues to work on anime but states that he wants to avoid positions of great responsibility. And ever since One Reg Priority, the studio Cloverworks has seemingly taken a different approach towards adapting their anime titles, in turn creating works such as the insanely popular Spy Family and the critically acclaimed Bocchi the Rock, among many other titles in the process. The studio has even gone as far as to make an honest attempt at fixing some issues of the past through creating Horimiya Pieces, a sequel to Horimiya that covers the major cut content from the first season which fans were really appreciative of. Unexpectedly, the once tarnished reputation of Cloverworks has now been somewhat regained through the efforts of its staff members. It would still be unjustified of me to claim that the working conditions over on Cloverworks have potentially improved. Adapting 6 to 8 titles a year is still on the very extreme end for any single anime studio. But as far as I'm aware, there have been no production issues or public staff complaints coming from Cloverworks ever since One Reg Priority. Also, they might adapt Blue Box in the near future, so I really wish they actually have their act together by now. In the end, after all the flaws and nitpicks and obvious plot holes I have already pointed out by now, I still think you should give this show a chance. Not for the story of course, but for the production value of One Reg that took some genuine care and effort to make. You should also consider subscribing. The video turned out to be a lot longer than I expected, so I really hope you enjoyed it. That's it, and thanks for watching.